Hello, today I'll be going through the design of one of my Gimmick platformers. This level is based on a star detector, which is a device that I made to turn the on-off state whenever Mario gets a star. Now first I'll explain the star detector itself, then I'll go into how I made a level to get the most mileage out of this mechanism as possible. So the star detector itself has two main parts. You have the detection aspect of it, where we have a rotten mushroom that chases Mario when Mario has no star, and it runs away from Mario when he does have a star. The rotten mushroom detection part transfers its signal as to whether or not Mario has a star onto the music block. And so we can see that activating here. Now the second part of the mechanism is the part below. This part of the mechanism was passed to me by GateG. And this is an adapter that converts a note block signal, or note block being triggered, into an on-off activation. So putting these two together allows the information of whether or not Mario has a star to be directly converted into an on-off signal. Now the conveyor here on the side is an auto-correction feature. So if at any point Mario were to get the star as a star runs out, the mechanism will correct itself and stop it from putting this level into the wrong on-off state. Now this is the main mechanism which I showed the player in the first screen so they have a better idea of what the gimmick is for the level. And later on I have the main device for the entire level, which is a long-range version of the same device. The premise of it is exactly the same. The only difference is that the thwomp is made globally loaded by this boom boom, and the muncher is made globally loaded by this claw on a track. Putting these two together, the entire device only despawns if the rotten mushroom despawns. And because the rotten mushroom is a power-up, it despawns only after 3 screens of distance. So it has a very long despawn range, which is more than enough to make a whole area for platforming purposes. All right, so now that you understand how the star detector works in general, I'm gonna go over the design of the gimmick level. Now, overall, there's like 2 main ways that you can approach designing a level around a gimmick. There's like the tech demo route and there's the gimmick platformer route. The tech demo route is, let's say I have a star detector, I'm going to try to show every possible way to use the device, even if it doesn't make sense in the level. And by that, I mean, we're going to see every possible setup that I can think of. So we're going to use dotted line blocks, we're going to use on-off conveyors, we're going to use on-off tracks. Literally any setup that I can think of that could be triggered with this device, I'm going to try to cram into my level. Obviously, like the way I'm making it sound, it's clear that this is not really the best choice for making a good level. If you want to show people, here are all my ideas, a tech demo is kind of how to do that, but it doesn't really make for a good level on its own. Now, a good gimmick platformer requires you to commit to just 1 or 2 specific use cases. So specifically in this level, I want it to be very wall jump heavy. And so what I chose is, instead of going with every possible on-off responsive object in the game, instead of going with dotted line blocks and conveyors and on-off tracks, I commit to using dotted line blocks mostly for wall jumps and platforming, or walls for platforming. That commitment allows me to make a whole level that is cohesively tied more than just around the idea of a star detector. It's also that the gameplay itself works together in one level. So let's go over the main design of the level. The main skills, as I kind of alluded to before, for this level are going to be wall jumps and vine jumps, with a couple of spin jumps sprinkled in. Those are the main pieces those are the main ways that Mario is going to move throughout the whole level. And so the way that I structure the first room is to bring that out. Remember that for any level that you make, the first room of it is going to be the most important room of the level because it introduces the player to the idea of your level, and it's supposed to be introducing it to them in a non-lethal way. So first, it's made best for me to explain the structure of the first room and how the play of the first room is going to teach the player here is what the level is about, and here's the skills that I expect you to have. So the very first thing the player sees when they get into a level is a required wall jump. Okay, no star gimmick yet. This small obstacle immediately tells the player you're going to be needing to wall jump. Wall jumping is an important part of this level. You will be needing that. Then players will normally seek out the star like crazy. So just almost ignoring anything else on the screen because the star gives you a free pass to not die to things. This is when the player will almost always realize the gimmick of the level, which is the dotted line blocks change whenever Mario has a star. Some players, they don't really quite get it, and so what I have at the end of this section is this part where if you get here and you see there's no on-off switch, you realize, how am I supposed to get through? And then as soon as the star runs out, that's when the dotted line block opens to let you into the door that you need. This is when even the densest of players figures out, the on-off state in this level is related to the star. A lot of people will ask why, either down here or up there, but at some point in the level, or at some point in the first room, they usually ask, why is this happening? And then they'll see the rotten mushroom and put 2 and 2 together. A lot of players won't figure out how this works, and that's totally okay. The main part is to show how the main core of the mechanism works, and then they'll be like, oh, cool, I like that idea, instead of making it like a black box. So another main thing in this level is the use of the on-off state. So the entirety of the level uses the dotted line blocks to make platforms that appear or disappear when basically collecting the star, so that your route forward versus your route backward is different. The star notably has a similar property to this, where it turns the spikes between dangerous to Mario versus not. So just like dotted line blocks, where in the on state, some of them are solid and the other ones are totally passable, or are just, they're not solid. The star changes the spikes in a very similar way between damaging and not damaging solids. And so this is why I kind of picked these two to pair together. Dotted line blocks and a star detector work really well together just because of that. Like, it really reinforces that two-state property of the star to bring that out. Additionally, this first room has a little bit of foreshadowing with this swamp, where there's some parts in the level where I'm using the star as kind of like a key that opens a door. So you can imagine that here's a damaging barrier that Mario cannot go through without dying unless he has a star. So the enemies are like a door, it's like a lock, and then Mario needs to go get a star, and when he comes back through here with a star, then he can kill the enemies, which will irreversibly open the door, so he can pass through here from that point on freely. So this gimmick level, the way that I'm using the gimmick is not just to flex, oh, here's how you use a star, but rather I'm thinking about, okay, how can I use the fact that the dotted line blocks and the spikes change in their relationship to Mario every time Mario gets the star. So the main way that I've implemented that in this level is by using a looping structure for level. So you go through the same area multiple times, not many times, but just like back and forth. And your path through the level is very, very different when you have a star versus no star. Because you have both the change to the spikes. The spikes are now terrain that you can touch, and the dotted line blocks change which are solid and which are not. So the entire layout of the level, rather than being a completely linear platformer, while there is always only one path forward, this linear one path forward always loops around. And I use different ways to enforce this looping structure. So I have, for example, this key. When Mario comes back with this key, then now he's allowed to go back through this area while the state is still on to go through the key door to the checkpoint. For this room, I use a wall that I talked about before, where Mario goes through without a star, gets a star, comes back a different route, opens this door, and then that allows him to go through this path with a star, go back, get the flimsy lift, etc. At every point in the level, the main thing to keep it from being confusing is to make sure that it's always clear to the player there's literally only one path forward. Alright, so for example, this Bill Blaster is not a mistake. This is literally designed so that the player has no option. They cannot go back to this other area without going through here and seeing the key door. Now this is the main thing that you'll notice about the level's structure and layout as a whole, which is that even though it has this path that loops around, there's never really multiple ways where you could go. Like here, while this is the most branching intersection point in level, there's only really one way to go. Alright? Outside of backtracking. Where when the player backtracks, they normally have an idea of like, I'm making negative progress, unless they come to a fork. Here, if they get a star, the path literally seals behind them. If they're confused as to, oh, let's just go straight back with a star, that cannot happen. So just generally speaking, keeping the player from being able to go the wrong way to keep it linear, even though the path forward is going in all sorts of different ways, stopping the player from wandering around is the number one easiest way to make sure the player stays on track and does not waste a ton of time getting lost and being like, where's the next part of the level? I'm so lost. Like, you don't want that kind of moment in a level like this, because it can easily spiral out of control. The last main point that I'd like to make on level is on the usage of vines. Now, a lot of people use decorative vines, always assume, like, I feel like this is obvious, but, you know, just in case, always assume that the player, if they see a vine and they can grab it, they will potentially grab it and use it to move around your level, potentially break something, cheese something, etc. So the way that I'm using vines in this level is as a main gameplay mechanic. So they are a main course element. The way that I'm introducing them is gradually. The very first screen does not show them at all. The next time we see a vine, here's the first vine that we can grab. It's totally optional. Here, it's slightly easier to use the vine, but not really necessary. The second vine, also optional, but much less so. This obstacle is way easier to grab the superstar if you are grabbing the vine. Then after that, I'm using some decorative vines here, so if Mario were to screw up that wall jump, he can potentially grab these vines to save himself from death, and then climb his way back up. Later on, after checkpoint 1, this is when we encounter the first set of absolutely mandatory vines, and then from this point onward in the level, mandatory vines become more and more apparent. But I very frequently use decorative vines in this sort of level as vines that you can actually use. Like, these vines are to actually save yourself to go backwards, etc. So overall, this is the main way that I laid out my level. I hope that this was interesting. If you like this content, feel free to subscribe for more. This is an officially endorsed Team Jamp level, so you can play for Jamp points. And you can see the level ID in the description below. Thank you all for your attention. I'll see you around.